Good morning. I'm glad to be here again. I enjoy coming here. And today, my special talk, what makes me not a Buddhist, starts, I think, when I was here last and I was introduced, and y'all have been around for the joke dates back. It's Pete the Buddhist, right? I was Joe the Buddhist for a while. And as I thought about that, I thought, there's something about that that's bugging me. Something about being called Pete the Buddhist that's bugging me. And one of the things that, not bugging me in a terrible way, Buddhists don't have a lot of room for judgment, it's not like that, but whenever you face an edge like that, when you see something, in Buddhist practice it's common to examine it, to look at it closely, to see what is it about that that's bugging me. And so it made me ask myself a lot of questions. The first thing that leapt to my mind was the idea that by being designated Pete the Buddhist, I become separate and away from others. In other words, there is Pete the Buddhist and maybe Judy the Christian. But in my practice and experience, that is not the true nature of things. We're not separate. So I had to ask myself these questions a little bit and look at it. And it took me to a book that I read some time ago. I have trouble pronouncing the teacher's name. Zangzar Chungyung Chungpa Khyentse Rinpoche. He's from Thailand, I think, and I have to look it up, but he wrote this book called What Makes You Not a Buddhist, where he kind of confronts Buddhism straight up for Buddhists, and says, what is your practice and how does this fall with the original teachings? And essentially what we come to, and this is the nature of the book, and this is also the lesson, is that if you are a practicing Buddhist, it comes down to confirmation of 4 essential teachings known as the pillars of Buddhism. And those are that all compounded phenomena are impermanent, that all emotions are delusion and thereby lead to suffering, that all things have no true inherent existence, and that nirvana is beyond conceptions. Well, that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff to think about, right? And when confronting Pete the Buddhist, it begs the question, where do these things, why then would I have an edge in practicing these things? And then practice becomes kind of the question, because as a Buddhist, I look at these teachings and I try to implement in my life things that will be my practice, whether it's, wear a certain shirt and sit upright and meditate and breathe and do certain things. Those are all part of my practice, but I like the word practice because that is what it is. You're practicing for these understandings. But it makes you question then, let's define, what does it mean to be a Buddha? What is a Buddha? Because when we refer to Buddha, historically, we refer to Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, who was one teacher in India, a prince who came to understanding and taught us these 4 pillars, but he is not seen as the only Buddha, and it's not hard to find. There are Buddhas now. I would very quickly point to Mahatma Gandhi as a Buddha. If you ask me today if there's one person on the planet that I had to point to and say that is a living Buddha, it would be Thich Nhat Hanh, who engages in a very particular way and it never goes away. He never stops being engaged with his understanding of truth. Well, then let's ask the question while we're on the subject of what does it mean to be Christ? Jesus of Nazareth, like Siddhartha Gautama, is the name of the person who would become known as the Christ, which I Googled to find out is the anointed one. And what does anointed mean? Well, it means to be blessed with and containing the Spirit of God. That is what the definition of the Christ is. So when you point to that, it's kind of similar. We're talking about someone who has engaged in a particular way and has a full understanding. For the Buddha, it means the one who is awakened, fully conscious to the truth, Thich Nhat Hanh, fully conscious to the truth, Siddhartha Gautama, who gave me these 4 things, which I have read and tried to understand through my practice. The ability to fully understand, realize, and engage these truths is what we call Buddha nature. It's what you call the Christ within. For me, to separate Pete the Buddhist, Judy the Christian, is a fundamentally incorrect understanding. It doesn't see the true nature of that. And I know for as long as I've heard the phrase, the Christ within, I'm not sure that that's fully understood and engaged in the way that it really ought to be. I mean, it's as if there is something out there that you are bringing in here. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of the truth. And I'm here to talk about what makes me not a Buddhist. So understanding these views can not only be intellectually examined, but experientially we begin to engage with it to free ourselves. So it's like a cup of tea. You know, when you look at the cup of tea, we can have all sorts of kinds of cups, and we can define the cup and we can debate the cup. This is my cup. It is my practice. It is Buddhism. It is these truths in this way. But you can't mistake the cup for the tea. The tea is the truth. The truth doesn't go away. The truth remains its nature. We can contain that truth in a cup. I might contain that through my Buddhist practice. But if you get confused between the cup and the tea, you're missing the point. You got to ask yourself, where is your cup? Does it gracefully hold the tea? Is that really tea in your cup? Those are big questions, and that is what, as a Buddhist, I've tried to examine with my practice. It's a lot of reading. It's reading and trying to pronounce the names of these teachers that is practice, right? It's engaging with this in particular ways. But as Buddhists, we seek enlightenment. Enlightenment means the realization of the truth. The realization is the absolute knowingness of these truths. I like that phrase, knowingness. I choose the phrase typically knowingness over the phrase faith. Because when you talk about faith, are you talking about believing there's tea in the cup? Or are you talking about knowing that there is tea and that I can gracefully hold it with this cup? Those are two different things. If we spend all of our time debating the ways in which we contain the truth, I think we tend to miss the truth. The beautiful song we had this morning, Om Mani Padme Hum, is the chant that you hear most often in monasteries. It's what the beads are for most of the time. As you counting 108 times, you say Om Mani Padme Hum. But it's a good example of what makes me not a Buddhist. Because that phrase means hail the jewel in the lotus. The lotus, the metaphor that the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, used to define what made him enlightened. The flower grows in the mud. It raises itself towards the sunshine and it opens up, and as it does, the truth is found inside in its beauty, in the action of its blooming. That's the jewel in the lotus. That is also the jewel in the teaching. It's in the engagement of that teaching, in the blooming of that flower that counts. Enlightenment is drinking the tea. It's when the tea becomes part of who you are. If you drink a cup of tea, then you recognize it isn't the cup will come and go. We have all sorts of kinds of cups. We have pretty cups, to-go cups, styrofoam cups, you name it. You can find a cup for those kinds of things, but it doesn't change the nature of the tea. But even the truth itself is no good unless you engage it. Some would argue this is what Zen Buddhism is about. It's about the fact that I can't describe it fully by describing the tea. Oh, this is vanilla spice tea. What does that mean? I can't engage it fully by doing that. I can't engage it fully by the cup. The only way to fully engage is by doing something I really can't, you could describe it, but it's not the same as experiencing drinking the tea. So what makes me not a Buddhist is when I am a Buddha. That's the thing. To be a Buddhist, to subscribe to the training, to do the studies, that's an important part of my life. But it's not the sitting still that counts. It's the engagement in being fully awake that makes me a Buddha. And being a Buddha is something that is totally available to me. That is what Siddhartha taught. Siddhartha taught that it doesn't matter. We think of Buddhists as robe-wearing mendicants, and we admire the way that they live their lives and the freedom that they seem to experience by focusing on the 4 pillars of Buddhism, these truths, and making it part of their life. But to be a Buddha is available now. He was clear about that. And the same is true, I believe, from the teachings of Jesus Christ. He wasn't there to say, I am the way, the truth, and the light, but the way in which I drink my tea is fully engaged, and you ought to do that too, because then you are engaged in what you really mean to be about, which is fundamentally to alleviate your suffering and the suffering of others, which fundamentally is the same thing that Siddhartha was teaching about. Jesus was a tea drinker too. He said, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth that which is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. That's from the Gospel of Thomas, verse 70. I believe that engagement is the thing. That is the action. It is the ability to engage in that counts. I believe that understanding incorrectly makes us focus on our cup. Makes us question, is my cup as good as my neighbor's cup? When that has nothing to do with the truth. And it doesn't matter what you think about it. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you have Buddhist thinking. It doesn't matter if you have Christian thinking. It doesn't matter if you have Muslim thinking. What matters is when you engage, are you doing the thing that is the truth? Because that's all that really counts. And we can spend all of our lives talking about what we think about it, but it doesn't matter what you think. The truth is the truth. The tea is not the cup. The cup is not the tea. And drinking is what counts. I still practice Buddhism, and I'm not here to pretend that I am somehow a purely enlightened being who can now spread the truth by my magical touch. But then I don't think either of those 2 other guys were either. I believe that the difference was that they had come to terms with the fact that they knew the difference between the tea and the cup, because the action was the thing. And so they engaged fully in that action. When you sing a song for the church, you're engaged fully in that action. When you read the daily word, you're engaged in that action. When you pull over and help somebody change a tire, you're engaged in that action. That is available to you with every single step. It's not out there. It isn't something separate. It isn't something that can be destroyed, because it is the truth. And so you have to ask yourself, when you face your own edge, when you look and you say, this thing makes me uncomfortable, you have to ask yourself, is it the cup? Because isn't that silly to be all bent out of shape over the cup? I can cup tea in my hands. I can engage fully, and I don't have to do this under any certain framework. It's like medicine. You know, there's a lot of different medicines out there, and they treat different ailments differently. And you have to pick which one of those medicines is going to work for you. If you get poison ivy, you might apply calamine lotion and get relief. But that doesn't mean that if you got diagnosed with cancer, you would compare calamine lotion to chemotherapy. They aren't the same. It doesn't change the relative truth that there is suffering to be alleviated, that suffering has certain causes and conditions, that understanding it fully is what allows you to engage and become a Buddha yourself, or an engaged Christian who is the light of the Christ within. Separating yourself from that is a problem. It is a fundamental difficulty, and you should practice against it. Because every moment that you spend worrying about the cup, you are not engaged in drinking tea. I was telling my dad about, and I would like to see us put on the calendar sometime, an event that I would like to see us do here. It'd be fun. It's something we do as part of our Zen practice through Great Vow Zen Monastery and the Corvallis Zen Circle that I participate with, and that is work practice. When you go to the monastery, you stay for a retreat, you have the experience of you go there and you meditate alongside the monastics, who make it look so easy. You eat alongside the monastics, a very specific way, and you engage in work practice. For me, maybe one of my first moments of enlightenment were held when I was at the monastery for the first time, and I was charged with watering the tomato plants. You see, in the summertime, everybody helps out. Everybody brings in the garden. That's the food for the year for the monastics. So it's an important job. But as I stood engaged in my practice, meditatively watering this plant with a clear mind, having meditated all day and night, I watered the plant. And I became really mindful of what I was doing, and that was a beautiful, wonderful experience. I was engaged in the hot sun. I was engaged with managing the hose. I was engaged with being really careful to give this plant the water it needed without getting any water on it that would burn it. I didn't want that plant to suffer. In fact, I needed it to not suffer. It was creating life. I was doing a lot of things in that moment. I was engaged with my environment. I was engaged in the life of this little plant whose ambition was to grow up and become part of the salad that would feed the monastics that would teach me this truth. That all happens on one little hillside with a little bit of water. It really did happen for me in that moment that I had a eureka moment of engaged enlightenment. It's the watering of the plant that counts, not what I think about it, not whether or not I like tomatoes. You know, that's not it. It's a matter of fostering the growth. So we do work practice as a way of fostering growth in our community. We all engage in the spring and summer of going to our facilities and working for the day together. We paint, we sweep, we pull weeds, we water tomato plants, we do office work, we do a lot of things, but we do it mindfully, engaged in what we're doing. Because when you put time in at the church, if you're volunteering, you are growing that plant. You are engaged in the doing. That is enlightened practice. That is you being Christly. Being that, which is not, again, separate from you. It cannot be separate from you. You are a cup of tea. So if you engage in that way, your life becomes more meaningful and more awake. It also becomes a lot more clear. Somebody brings all their baggage and nonsense. My baggage and nonsense. Here, take this. And you look, and you're able to engage in compassion of helping them with their turmoil without necessarily the cup that they've brought with them. Sometimes that's all it takes to be the Buddha, to be the Christ for someone in your midst. And when that happens, here's your big chance to be what it is you really want to be. We can engage in a lot of things. We engage in business, we can engage in work, we can engage in relationships, but in the end, if you're not engaging fully conscious, fully awake of those few fundamental things that drive you, which are truthfully the, actions of compassion and love and understanding, of wisdom. If you engage with those things, you will find things to be meaningful It is their nature. It doesn't change. It is the nature of things to be meaningful. It's the cup that we often find is not. So what makes me not a Buddhist are the moments when I get to be a Buddha. I try to not let them pass by. I'll be at work and somebody will walk up to me and say, I'm having this experience and I'm upset or whatever, or I have this question. And when the truth is there and I know it unequivocally, I'm going to share it. Not an opinion, not a I think this is better than that. Anything like that is delusion. But rather knowing that their suffering sucks, and I would do anything I could to ease that suffering. Easing suffering, exercising compassion, they're all verbs. They're all actions. When you read this, it doesn't seem to matter. Consider the lilies of the field. Consider. It's an action. So if you're going to live your life and engage in an enlightened action way, right? Enlightened verb, then you're going to have to realize the difference between the cup and the actual experience of drinking tea. When you can engage in the actual experience of drinking tea, it isn't one of opinion. Doesn't matter what you call it. It could be Buddhist or Christian. And in fact, I get more and more to where in order to engage in the truth, I don't want any titles, because those can only separate me. Pete the Buddhist, well, that's fun, and it's a nice designation. It's a nice designation to say, oh, here are my philosophies that I use. This is what my cup looks like, right? But the real nitty-gritty happens in not that. Happens in the actionable function of engaging the truth, which is here and now. Om Mani Padme Hum, the jewel in the lotus, is still something I will chant and I will still engage in practice, because I know that I am not so fully enlightened that I will never experience suffering or the causes of suffering. I'm going to. But I also know that I can engage in that suffering and experience the suffering differently. That I can look at it with truth. That when I engage in that, I am not a Buddhist and I am not a Christian. I am a Buddha, or I have exercised the Christ within. But what I am doing, whatever you want to call it, is enlightenment, is being engaged. And I aspire to do that. That's all I have.